The rain hammered against the windows of Kim Dae-ho's small farmhouse like angry fists. Thunder rolled across the dark sky while lightning split the night into brief moments of silver brightness. Dae-ho sat at his wooden kitchen table drinking hot tea and watching the storm rage outside. At 45 years old, he had seen many storms in his life, but this one felt different. The wind howled with a voice that seemed almost alive. His small farm sat on the edge of Andong, far from the busy city lights. Rice fields stretched in all directions around his property, broken only by his vegetable garden and the old red barn that his grandfather had built decades ago. Dae-ho lived alone and preferred it that way. The quiet life suited him well. He grew enough food to sell at the local market and had enough left over to feed himself. Simple needs, simple life. The storm had been building all day. Dark clouds had rolled in from the mountains just after lunch, bringing with them a strange green tint that Dae-ho had never seen before. The local weather reports had warned of heavy rain, but nothing like this. The thunder seemed to shake the very ground beneath his feet. A particularly loud crash of thunder made Dae-ho jump. He finished his tea and decided it was time for bed. Tomorrow would bring cleanup work around the farm, and he would need his rest. As he stood to wash his cup, another sound caught his attention. It was different from the storm noise, softer, almost like crying. Dae-ho paused at the sink and listened carefully. There it was again, a low, mournful sound that seemed to come from the direction of his barn. It could be one of his chickens, scared by the storm, or maybe a wild animal seeking shelter. He had found stray cats in his barn before during bad weather. He pulled on his heavy raincoat and rubber boots. The flashlight by the door still had good batteries. Dae-ho stepped out into the storm and immediately felt the full force of the wind and rain. The cold drops hit his face like tiny needles. He pulled his hood up tight and made his way carefully across the muddy yard toward the barn. The old building stood solid against the storm, just as it had for 50 years. His grandfather had built it well with thick wooden beams and a strong roof. Dae-ho reached the large sliding door and paused to listen again. The crying sound was definitely coming from inside. He slid the door open just enough to squeeze through and stepped into the dark barn. The smell hit him first. It was not the usual hay and animal smell he expected. This was something sharp and strange, like metal and flowers mixed together. Dae-ho raised his flashlight and swept the beam across the barn interior. At first everything looked normal. His old tractor sat in the corner next to stacks of hay bales. Farm tools hung neatly on the walls where he had left them. Then the light caught something that made him freeze. In the far corner, huddled behind a pile of feed sacks, was a figure. At first glance it looked like a woman, but as Dae-ho moved closer he could see that something was very wrong. The figure was too tall and too thin. Her skin had a pale blue tint that seemed to glow faintly in the darkness. Long silver hair hung down over her face. She was clearly pregnant. Very pregnant. Her strange clothing looked torn and dirty, as if she had been traveling for a long time. She looked up at Dae-ho with large eyes that reflected his flashlight beam like a cat's eyes. She made a soft sound that might have been words in a language he had never heard before. Dae-ho's first instinct was to run. This was clearly not human. But as he looked at her more closely, he saw something that stopped him. She was afraid. Despite her strange appearance, he could see fear and exhaustion in her alien features. She was shivering from cold and her breathing was quick and shallow. She spoke again in her unknown language. Her voice was musical but weak. She placed one long-fingered hand on her swollen belly and looked at Dae-ho with pleading eyes. She needed help. Whatever she was, wherever she came from, she was in trouble. Dae-ho had been raised by his grandmother after his parents died in a car accident. She had taught him that when someone needs help, you help them first and ask questions later. It did not matter if they were strangers. It did not matter if they were different. Kindness was the most important thing in the world. He set his flashlight down, pointing toward her so she could see his hands. Moving slowly so he would not frighten her more, Dae-ho pulled off his raincoat. The barn was cold, but not as cold as the storm outside. He offered the coat to her. She looked at it for a moment. then reached out with a trembling hand to take it. Her fingers were longer than human fingers and had an extra joint, but her grateful smile was universal. Daeho pointed to himself and said clearly, "Daeho." Then he pointed to her with a questioning look. She seemed to understand. She pointed to herself and made a sound that might have been Nara. He nodded and repeated, "Nara." She smiled again, and some of the fear left her eyes. He held up one finger to tell her to wait, then hurried back to his house. The storm was still raging, but he barely noticed it now. His mind was racing with questions. What was she? Where had she come from? How had she ended up in his barn? But those questions could wait. Right now she needed warmth, food, and shelter. Daeho gathered supplies quickly. He filled a thermos with hot soup from the pot on his stove. He grabbed clean blankets from his closet and a pillow from his bed. From his first aid kit he took bandages and antiseptic in case she was injured. He also took a bottle of water and some bread. When he returned to the barn, Nara was still huddled in the corner, but she had put on his raincoat. She watched him approach with cautious hope. Daeho set down the supplies and showed her each item. The hot soup made her eyes widen with what looked like surprise and gratitude. She accepted the bottle of water and drank deeply. He spread the blankets on a pile of hay to make a comfortable bed. Nara understood and moved carefully to the improvised bed. Her movements were slow and awkward because of her pregnancy, but Daeho could see that she was graceful when not exhausted. As she settled onto the blankets, Nara looked up at Daeho and spoke in her musical language. He could not understand the words, but her tone was clear. She was thanking him. He nodded and patted her shoulder gently before backing away to give her space. Daeho picked up his flashlight and headed for the barn door. He would let her rest for now, but tomorrow he would have to figure out what to do next. As he reached the door, he heard her voice again. He turned back and saw her watching him. She pressed her hand to her heart and then reached it toward him, another universal gesture. Gratitude from the heart. He nodded once more and stepped out into the storm. The rain was beginning to lighten, and he could see breaks in the clouds, where stars showed through. As he walked back to his house, Daeho wondered what tomorrow would bring. His quiet, simple life had just become very complicated, but as he lay in bed listening to the storm fade away, he felt no regret about his decision to help the strange, pregnant woman. His grandmother had been right. Kindness was always the right choice, no matter how strange the circumstances. He just hoped he would be able to help Nara through whatever trouble had brought her to his barn on this stormy night. The last thing Daeho heard before sleep took him was the distant sound of what might have been a spaceship engine, fading away into the night sky. Daeho woke to the sound of screaming. The clock beside his bed showed 3 a.m. Outside, the storm had passed, leaving behind a clear night sky filled with stars. But the screaming was coming from his barn. High-pitched cries of pain that made his blood run cold. He jumped out of bed and pulled on his clothes as fast as he could. The alien woman Nara was in labor. Daeho had helped deliver calves and foals on neighboring farms, but this was completely different. He had no idea what to expect from an alien birth. The screaming came again, louder this time. Daeho grabbed his medical supplies and ran across the yard. The mud from yesterday's storm splashed under his feet. When he reached the barn and slid open the door, he found Nara writhing on the blankets he had given her. Her pale blue skin was now glowing brighter, pulsing with waves of soft light that matched her breathing. She saw him and reached out with both hands. Her musical language poured out in rapid, desperate sounds. Daeho could not understand the words, but he knew she was asking for help. He knelt beside her and took her hands. They were burning hot despite her cold appearance. The next few hours passed in a blur of strange sights and sounds. Nara's body stretched and changed in ways that seemed impossible. Her skin became almost transparent, showing flowing patterns of light underneath. The barn filled with a sweet smell like flowers and rain. When the first baby came, Daeho nearly dropped it in shock. The infant was small and delicate, with the same pale blue skin as its mother, but it had 4 arms instead of 2, and its eyes were huge and dark like pools of water. It made no sound when it was born, just looked around with those enormous eyes as if it was studying everything. Deho wrapped the baby in a clean towel and handed it to Nara. She pressed it against her chest and made soft cooing sounds. The baby's skin began to glow with the same gentle light as its mother's. Before Deho could catch his breath, Nara screamed again. The second baby was coming. This one was different from the first. It had only 2 arms, but its legs were longer and more flexible. Its skin was a deeper shade of blue and covered with intricate patterns that seemed to move and shift. When Deho cleaned it and placed it in Nara's arms, it immediately wrapped its tiny fingers around her thumb. The third baby came an hour later. It was the most human-looking of the 3, with normal proportions and only slightly blue-tinted skin. But when it opened its eyes, they glowed with inner light like tiny stars. All 3 babies seemed healthy and alert, watching everything around them with obvious intelligence. Nara was exhausted but alive. The glowing under her skin had faded to a dim shimmer. She looked at her 3 children with love and relief, then up at Deho with tears in her large eyes. She spoke a single word in her language that sounded like gratitude in any tongue. Deho sat back on his heels and tried to process what had just happened. He was a simple farmer who grew rice and vegetables. His biggest worry yesterday had been whether the storm would damage his crops. Now he was sitting in his barn with an alien mother and her 3 newborn children. As the sun began to rise, Deho made breakfast and brought it to the barn. Nara ate hungrily while the babies slept in her arms. In the morning light he could see her more clearly. She was beautiful in an otherworldly way, with sharp cheekbones and pointed ears. Her silver hair fell in waves down her back. After she finished eating, Nara began to communicate through gestures and drawings in the dirt floor. She drew a circle and pointed up at the sky. Then she drew smaller circles around it and made explosive motions with her hands. War, Deho realized. There had been a war in space. She drew a ship shape and showed it crashing. She pointed to herself and made walking motions, then pointed toward his barn. She had survived the crash and walked here looking for shelter. But where were the others from her ship? Nara's expression grew sad. She drew more figures and then covered them with her hands. Gone, dead, she and her babies were alone. The sound of a truck engine made them both freeze. Someone was coming up the long driveway to Deho's farm. He looked through a crack in the barn wall and saw his neighbor Park Minho climbing out of his old pickup truck. Minho owned the farm next door and often came to help during busy seasons. Deho stepped outside and closed the barn door behind him. Minho was carrying a basket of fresh eggs and smiling. "The storm knocked down one of my fences," he called out. "I thought you might need help checking your property for damage." "Thank you, that is very kind," Deho replied, trying to sound normal, "but everything seems fine here." Minho studied his face. They had been neighbors for 15 years, and Minho could read him well. "You look tired, my friend. Did the storm keep you awake?" Before Deho could answer, one of the babies cried from inside the barn. It was a sound unlike anything either man had ever heard. Musical and strange, like wind chimes in a breeze. Minho's eyes widened. "What was that?" Deho sighed. He could not keep this secret from his closest neighbor. "I need to show you something, but you must promise to keep it between us." "Of course," Minho said, though his expression was confused. Deho opened the barn door and led Minho inside. Nara looked up from feeding one of her babies. The morning sunlight streaming through the windows made her skin shimmer like water. All 3 infants were awake now, looking around with their large, intelligent eyes. Minho stopped dead in his tracks. His mouth fell open and the basket of eggs slipped from his hands, crashing to the floor. For a long moment, no one moved or spoke. Then the baby with 4 arms reached out toward Minho and made a soft, curious sound. The gesture was so innocent and trusting that Minho's fear melted away. He stepped closer and knelt down beside Nara. "They are beautiful," he whispered. Nara seemed to understand his tone even if she did not know the words. She smiled and held up the baby with the glowing eyes. Minho reached out carefully and let the infant wrap its tiny fingers around his thumb. "How?" Minho asked. Daeho explained what had happened during the storm. He told Minho about finding Nara in the barn and helping with the birth. He showed him the drawings she had made in the dirt, explaining about the war and the crashed ship. So they are refugees, Minho said softly. Running from war, just like humans have done throughout history. Nara seemed to sense they were talking about her. She reached into a small pack that Daeho had not noticed before. From it she pulled out a device that looked like a smooth stone but glowed with internal light. She pressed it and suddenly it projected images into the air above their heads. The images showed space battles between massive ships. Explosions of light and energy, planets burning, millions of beings fleeing their homes. The scope of destruction was beyond anything either man could imagine. Then the images changed to show peaceful scenes. Gardens floating in space. Cities built on clouds. Children of many different species playing together. This was what the war had destroyed. The device shut off and Nara looked at them with pleading eyes. She spoke in her musical language, gesturing toward her babies and then toward the images they had just seen. She wants us to understand, Daeho said quietly. She is not invading our world. She is asking for sanctuary, Minho nodded slowly. What do we do now? Before Daeho could answer, Nara activated another device from her pack. This one was smaller and began to glow with increasing intensity. She looked at it with concern and spoke urgently in her language. I think she is saying more. Are coming? Daeho said. Nara pointed to the sky and nodded. Then she held up fingers. 2, 3, more survivors were on their way. Drawn by whatever signal her device was sending, Minho looked at Daeho with determination. We help them, all of them. My barn is larger than yours. We can shelter more refugees. There, the government will find out eventually, Daeho warned. Then we make sure we are ready when they do, Minho replied. But first we take care of mothers and children who need help. Nara seemed to understand their decision. She pressed her hands together and bowed her head in gratitude. The babies made soft sounds as if they too were thanking their human protectors. As they planned how to prepare for more arrivals, none of them realized that this was just the beginning. The barn that had sheltered one desperate refugee would soon become a beacon of hope for survivors from across the galaxy. And the simple act of kindness that started it all would eventually change the fate of both Earth and the stars beyond. 3 weeks had passed since the night of the storm, and Daeho's quiet farm life had become something he never could have imagined. The barn that once held only hay and farm tools now buzzed with alien technology and the sounds of growing children. Nara's 3 babies were developing at an incredible speed. What should have taken months was happening in days. The 4-armed child, whom Nara had named Jiho using a Korean name that Daeho suggested, could already sit up and reach for objects with precision that amazed both men. Subin, the one with longer legs and shifting skin patterns, crawled around the barn exploring everything with curious hands. Yunwoo, the most human-looking with glowing eyes, seemed to understand both Korean and Nara's alien language, but the children were not the most shocking change. That honor belonged to what Nara had done to the farm itself. It started small. Nara had been weak after giving birth, but as her strength returned, she began to show them things. She took a device from her pack that looked like a metal flower and placed it in Daeho's vegetable garden. Overnight, his struggling tomato plants grew twice their normal size and produced fruit that was larger and more delicious than anything he had ever grown. How does it work? Minho asked. Kneeling beside the device, Nara touched the soil and made flowing motions with her hands. She pointed to the sun and then to the plants. Somehow, the device was helping the plants use sunlight and water more efficiently. She activated a translator device that projected simple images and spoke in broken Korean. Earth good soil, earth plants strong. My tools help plants be more strong. Within a week, she had placed similar devices throughout both farms. Daeho's rice fields began producing grain that was twice as nutritious as normal rice. Minho's corn grew taller and fuller than anything he had seen in 30 years of farming. The water usage dropped by more than half, but the crops were healthier than ever. The barn itself was changing too. Nara had unpacked more equipment from her small bag, which seemed to hold far more than should have been possible. She installed panels on the walls that glowed with soft light during the day and provided warmth at night. The old wooden structure now maintained perfect temperature and humidity without any visible power source. She created a communication center in one corner using devices that looked like crystalline trees. When activated, they projected holographic maps showing locations around the world where other refugee ships had landed. Dozens of green dots pulsed on the display, each representing survivors who had made it to Earth. "So many," Deho whispered. As he watched the map update, Nara nodded sadly. "War scattered us like seeds in wind. Some seeds find good soil, some do not." Her English was improving daily, especially with help from young Hyunwoo, who seemed to absorb languages like a sponge. The glowing-eyed child often translated between his mother and the human farmers, his small voice switching effortlessly between Korean and the musical alien tongue. More refugees began arriving at the farm. They came in small groups, guided by the signals from Nara's communication devices. Each group brought new technologies and skills. A tall, thin being with silver skin installed a water purification system that could clean the well water to perfect purity. A creature that looked like a walking tree showed them how to grow vegetables that could survive in any climate. The barn expanded to accommodate them all. Not physically, but through the use of space-folding technology that Nara explained as making small spaces hold big things. From the outside, it looked like the same old red barn that Daeho's grandfather had built. Inside, it now contained sleeping areas, workshop spaces, and a nursery for the growing number of refugee children. Daeho found himself learning things he never thought possible. A blue-scaled being named Kelsa taught him how to communicate with plants directly, sensing their needs through touch. A floating jellyfish-like creature showed him techniques for soil management that would keep his fields fertile for generations, but the most amazing change was in the children. All the refugee young, from different species across the galaxy, played together as if they had always been friends. They created games that combined the rules from a dozen different worlds. They built toys using both human materials and alien technology. Jiho had learned to use his 4 arms to help with farm work, carrying twice as much as any human child his apparent age. Sabin's shifting skin patterns now showed emotions and intentions, making communication easier even when words failed. Hyunwoo had become the unofficial ambassador between all the different species, his natural charm and language skills helping everyone understand each other. One morning, Daeho was working in his expanded vegetable garden when a familiar truck drove up his driveway. His heart sank when he saw the government license plates. But instead of soldiers or scientists, a single woman got out of the vehicle. She was in her 40s with short black hair and military bearing. She walked directly to where Daeho was kneeling among his impossibly large vegetables and stopped a few feet away. "Kim Daeho?" she asked. "Yes, I am Lia Soyoung. I am your sister." Daeho stood up slowly, his mouth falling open. He had not seen his sister in 10 years, not since their grandmother's funeral. Soyoung had joined the military right out of school and traveled all over the world. The last he heard, she was working for some government agency in Seoul. "Soyoung, what are you doing here?" She looked around at his transformed farm, taking in the obviously advanced technology mixed with traditional farming tools. "I work for a department that monitors unusual energy signatures. We have been tracking strange readings in this area for 3 weeks. Daeho felt his stomach drop. "I can explain." "I hope so, because what our satellites are seeing makes no sense. This region is producing energy patterns that should not exist on Earth." She paused and studied his face. "You look good, brother, healthier than I have seen you in years." Before he could respond, Hyunwoo came running out of the barn. The 3-year-old boy with glowing eyes ran straight to Daeho and hugged his legs. Chattering in Korean about something exciting he had discovered, Soyoung stared at the child. "Daeho, why do that boy's eyes glow?" Hyunwoo looked up at her and Smiled. In perfect Korean, he said, "Hello, Aunt Soyoung. Mama said you would come soon. She has been preparing tea for you." "Mama?" Soyoung asked weakly. That was when Nara emerged from the barn, carrying Jiho in two of her forearms while Subin walked beside her. Her pale blue skin shimmered in the morning sunlight, and her silver hair caught the breeze. She approached Soyoung with a gentle smile and spoke in accented but clear Korean. "Welcome, sister of Daeho. I am Nara. These are my children. We are honored to meet you." Soyoung looked from Nara to the children to her brother and back again. Her military training had prepared her for many situations, but not for this. "You are not human." "No," Nara agreed. "We are refugees from a war among the stars. Your brother saved our lives." "There are more of us," Yunwoo added helpfully. "Want to meet everyone?" Soyoung sat down heavily on a nearby log. "I think I need that tea now." As Nara led the group toward the barn, more alien heads peeked out curiously. Word had spread that Daeho's sister had arrived. The communication devices were already buzzing with messages to and from other refugee communities around the world. Daeho walked beside his sister, who was still trying to process what she was seeing. "How long have you known?" she asked quietly. "Known what?" That first contact was not going to happen the way we planned. That when aliens finally came to Earth, it would not be through government channels or military protocols. She gestured toward the barn where dozens of different species were now gathered to meet her. It would happen because a farmer decided to help a pregnant stranger during a storm. Daeho considered this. "I did not know anything. I just did what grandmother taught us. Help people who need help." Soyoung smiled for the first time since arriving. She would be proud of you, brother, and terrified, but mostly proud. As they entered the transformed barn, filled with the sounds of interstellar civilization taking root in rural Korea, Daeho realized that his simple life was gone forever. But looking at the thriving community of humans and aliens working together, he found he did not mind. Some changes were worth making. The only question now was what would happen when the rest of the world found out what was growing in his barn. 2 days after Soyoung's arrival, the peaceful morning routine at Daeho's farm was interrupted by the sound of helicopters. 3 black aircraft circled overhead before landing in the rice fields. Men and women in dark suits emerged, followed by soldiers carrying equipment that looked almost as advanced as the alien technology hidden in the barn. Daeho stood in his front yard watching the procession approach. Beside him, Soyoung adjusted her military uniform and checked her radio one final time. She had spent the past 48 hours sending coded messages to her superiors in Seoul, trying to prepare them for what they were about to discover. "Remember what we discussed?" she said quietly to her brother. "Let me do the talking at first. These people are not ready for the truth." The leader of the group was a tall man with silver hair and sharp eyes. He approached with the confident stride of someone used to being in charge. Behind him walked scientists carrying detection equipment and military officers with weapons at the ready. "Director Choi Seon-ho," the man introduced himself with a slight bow. "I am the head of the Department of Unusual Phenomena. Agent Lee Soyoung has reported some interesting developments on this property. My brother's farm has always been productive," Soyoung replied carefully. "But recently the yields have improved significantly." Director Choi looked around at the obviously enhanced crops growing in perfectly organized rows. The vegetables were larger and more colorful than anything found in nature. The rice stalks stood taller and fuller than any variety known to science. Even someone with no farming experience could see that something extraordinary was happening. "Here, our satellites have detected energy signatures consistent with technology that does not exist on Earth," Choi said. "We need to investigate the source." Before anyone could respond, Hyunwoo came running out of the farmhouse. The 3-year-old boy had grown even more in the past few days, now looking like a child of 5 or 6. His glowing eyes sparked with excitement as he ran to Daeho and grabbed his hand. "Uncle Daeho, Mama says the visitors are here. She has prepared the big meeting room in the barn. Everyone is waiting." The government team froze. Director Choi stared at the child's glowing eyes, then looked at the barn behind them. Through the open doors, they could see lights that definitely did not belong in a traditional farm building. "Who is Mama?" Choi asked in a carefully controlled voice. Hyunwoo tilted his head with the innocent confusion of a child. "Mama is Nara. She's from the Kellyan Republic. Do you want to meet her? She speaks Korean now, much better than last month." One of the scientists behind Choi was frantically taking readings with his equipment. "Sir, the energy signatures are strongest near that barn. Whatever is generating them is inside that building." Director Choi looked at Soyoung with raised eyebrows. "Agent Lee, what exactly have you been reporting to us?" "The truth, sir. But I do not think you believed it was possible until now." Hyunwoo tugged on Daeho's hand. "Are we going to meet everyone?" Jiho and Subin are excited to show their new inventions. And Kelsa finished the water purification system for the whole valley. "Water purification system?" Choi asked weakly. Daeho decided that secrecy was no longer possible. "Director Choi, I think it would be better if we showed you everything at once. But I want your promise that no one will be hurt." "I cannot make promises until I understand what we are dealing with." "Then, let me make it simple," Soyeon said. 3 weeks ago, refugees from an interstellar war crashed on Earth. They are not invaders. They are families with children who need shelter. My brother gave them that shelter, and in return they have shared technology that can solve many of our world's problems. The government team exchanged glances. This was clearly not what they had expected to find. Director Choi had prepared for many scenarios, but not for refugees. Nara emerged from the barn, moving with the graceful walk that marked her as clearly non-human. Her pale blue skin gleamed in the afternoon sunlight, and her silver hair flowed behind her like liquid metal. She approached the group without fear, though Daeho could see the tension in her shoulders. "Director Choi," she said in accented Korean. "I am Nara, former diplomat of the Kellyan Republic. I request formal audience to discuss asylum for my people." Choi's mouth opened and closed several times before he found his voice. "You are actually alien?" "Yes, we are refugees from the hegemony. War, our worlds were destroyed, our fleets scattered. Those who survived came to Earth seeking sanctuary." "How many?" Choi asked. Nara gestured toward the barn. "In this location, 37 individuals of 12 different species. Worldwide, approximately 2,000 survivors have reached your planet." 2,000, Choi repeated faintly. "Jiho." And Subin came running out of the barn, followed by several other alien children of various species. They surrounded Hyunwoo, chattering in multiple languages about something they had been working on. The sight of children playing together, regardless of their species, seemed to affect the government team more than any adult alien could have. "They are just children," one of the female scientists whispered. "Children who will grow up knowing both human and alien cultures," Nara agreed. "Children who will be the bridge between our peoples if you allow it." Director Choi looked around at his team, then back at the barn where more alien heads were peeking out curiously. "This is not how first contact was supposed to happen." "How was it supposed to happen?" Daeho asked. "Official channels, government-to-government military protocols. Not farmers giving shelter to pregnant refugees." Soyoung stepped forward. "Sir, with respect, their governments are gone. Their militaries were destroyed. What you see here are the survivors, and they chose to come to places like this because they knew that rural communities would help them first and ask questions later." Minho appeared from behind the barn, leading a group of alien farmers who had been working in the expanded fields. His clothes were dirty from a morning of planting, and he looked completely comfortable among beings that would have terrified most humans. "Director Choi?" Minho called out. "I am Park Minho, Daeho's neighbor. These folks have taught me farming techniques that have doubled my harvest while using half the water. Would you like to see?" The surreal nature of the situation was clearly overwhelming the government team. They had come prepared for a possible alien invasion, not for a farming cooperative. Nara seemed to sense their confusion. "Perhaps it would Help if you saw what we have built together. Understanding comes easier when you see the results of cooperation. She led the group toward the barn. As they approached, the building seemed to shimmer and expand, revealing interior spaces that should not have been possible given its external dimensions. Space folding technology, one of the scientists breathed. The energy signatures make sense now. Inside the barn, they found a bustling community center. Aliens of different species worked alongside humans at stations that combined Earth materials with advanced technology. Children played in areas designed for multiple types of physiology. In one corner, a classroom where human and alien youngsters learned together. But the most impressive sight was the communication center. Holographic displays showed real-time connections with refugee communities around the world. Farm cooperatives in Brazil, fishing villages in Norway, mountain communities in Nepal, all sheltering alien survivors and benefiting from shared knowledge. You have created a global network, Director Choi said with something approaching awe. We have created what your people call the Internet, but for practical cooperation instead of just information sharing, Nara explained. Each community contributes what it does best. Each community receives what it needs most. Hyun-woo ran up to the director and took his hand with the trusting nature of a child. Want to see my favorite part? We have a garden that grows food from 20 different worlds, and it all tastes good together. As the boy led the government official deeper into the transformed barn, Daeho realized that something fundamental was shifting. This was no longer about hiding refugees or managing first contact. This was about choosing what kind of future humanity would build. Director Choi stopped in front of a display showing agricultural improvements across the globe. Food production up by 40% in areas with refugee communities, water usage down by 30%, soil quality improving instead of declining. How long before the rest of the world learns about this? He asked. That depends on you. Nara replied. We can remain hidden in rural areas, helping quietly while your governments decide what to do. Or we can work together openly to solve the problems that affect all our peoples. Choi looked around at the thriving community, at human and alien children playing together, at technology that could transform civilization being used to grow better vegetables. I think, he said slowly, that our protocols need to change. This is not an invasion or a visitation, this is immigration. And maybe that is exactly what Earth needs right now. Outside the barn, more helicopters were landing, but these carried scientists and agricultural specialists, not soldiers. The age of hiding was ending, and the age of cooperation was about to begin. 6 months after Director Choi's first visit, the world had changed in ways no one could have predicted. What started as a secret in Daeho's barn had become a global phenomenon. Refugee communities were now openly working with human settlements across every continent, sharing knowledge and building a better future together. But peace was not meant to last. The morning alarm came at dawn, piercing through the usual sounds of farm work and children playing. Nara's communication devices lit up with urgent messages from space. Her pale blue skin turned almost white as she read the incoming signals. They have found us, she announced to the emergency meeting in the barn. The hegemony fleet has detected our refuge signals. They are coming to Earth. Director Choi, who now lived part-time at the farm to coordinate between the alien communities and world governments, felt his stomach drop. How long do we have? 3 weeks, maybe 4, Nara replied. Their ships are fast, but they will approach. Carefully. The hegemony conquers by studying their targets first. Daeho looked around at the faces surrounding him. Humans and aliens who had become family over the past months. Children who knew no difference between species. Farmers who had learned to grow food that could feed the galaxy. What do they want? He asked. Everything, said Kelsa, the blue-scaled being who had taught them advanced farming. The hegemony does not just conquer worlds. They absorb them. They take the best of each species and add it to their collective. They turn civilizations against themselves. Hyunwoo, now looking like a 10-year-old despite being less than a year old, stepped forward. His glowing eyes were serious beyond his apparent age. "Mama, tell them about the human factor." Nara looked surprised. "You have been listening to the adult conversations." "We all have," Jiho added, using his forearms to gesture toward the other children. "We understand more than you think." Sabin's skin patterns shifted to show determination. "Tell them why the hegemony has never faced anything like Earth before." Nara took a deep breath. "The hegemony conquers by corruption. They find the leaders of a world and offer them power in exchange for cooperation. They turn species against each other by exploiting fear and greed. They have perfected this strategy across thousands of worlds." "But," Director Choi prompted, "but they have never encountered humans. Your species has something rare in the galaxy. You show kindness to strangers without expecting anything in return. You help those who are different from you, even when it is dangerous or difficult." Minho spoke up from where he sat with his alien farming partners. "My grandmother used to say that we judge our humanity by how we treat those who cannot help." "US in return," exactly, Nara said. "The hegemony cannot understand this. Their strategy relies on selfishness and fear. They expect every species to act in their own interest first. When they study Earth, they will see military forces and governments. But they will miss the real strength of humanity." "Which is?" Choi asked. "Communities like this one," Daeho answered. "People who choose to help because it is the right thing to do." Soyoung had arrived the night before with a full briefing on military preparations around the world. "The governments are mobilizing every defense we have. Nuclear weapons, orbital platforms, everything. But if what you are saying is true, military force alone will not be enough." "It will not," confirmed another refugee, a tall being with crystal-like skin who had once been a hegemony military analyst before defecting. "I have seen their fleet compositions. They have enough firepower to glass continents. But that is not how they prefer to win. Then how do we fight them?" Choi demanded. Yunwoo walked over to the communication center and activated a global display. Thousands of green dots appeared, showing every refugee community on Earth. "We fight them by being human, by doing what humans do best." The children had been working on something in secret, it turned out. Over the past month, they had used the communication network to create detailed plans with refugee communities worldwide. Not battle plans, but something much more sophisticated. "Show them," Subin urged. The display changed to show detailed maps of Earth's rural areas. Farms, fishing villages, mountain communities, desert settlements. All the places where refugees had found shelter and shared their knowledge. "The hegemony will expect to find centralized targets," Jiho explained with his child's voice carrying adult wisdom. "Capital cities, military bases, government centers. They will try to corrupt leaders and turn people against each other. But our real strength is not in those places," Yunwoo continued. "It is here. In thousands of small communities where humans and aliens work together every day." The plan was brilliant in its simplicity. While Earth's governments would provide the obvious military resistance that the hegemony expected, the real defense would come from the grassroots communities. Each rural settlement would become a hidden fortress, using alien technology integrated with human knowledge. "Distributed resistance," the crystal-skinned analyst said with approval. "The hegemony has no experience with this approach. They are used to hierarchical opponents with clear command structures." "But we are not hierarchical," Minho said. "We are farmers, fishermen, village people. We make decisions together and help each other because that is how we survive." Over the following weeks, the transformation accelerated. Alien refugees shared defensive technologies that had been kept hidden until now. Energy shields that looked like greenhouse glass. Weapons that appeared to be farming tools. Communication systems built into irrigation networks. The children, with their hybrid perspectives and rapid learning abilities, became the key to everything. They understood both human and alien ways of thinking. They could teach human farmers how to use alien technology, And they helped alien refugees understand the stubborn independence that made rural humans so hard to conquer. Deho found himself training with weapons that could level buildings but looked like modified plowing equipment. His rice fields now contained sensor networks that could track spacecraft from orbit. His barn had become the command center for a defense grid that spanned 3 provinces. "I am still just a farmer," he told Nara one evening as they watched human and alien children playing together in the yard. "Yes," she replied. "That is exactly why the hegemony will not understand you. They expect rulers and soldiers. They do not expect farmers who fight to protect strangers' children as fiercely as their own." The refugee network had become something unprecedented in galactic history. Not a military alliance or a political union, but a community of communities. Each settlement remained independent, making its own decisions, but all connected by shared values of helping those in need. When the hegemony scouts finally arrived, they found exactly what they expected. Earth's governments had assembled impressive military forces. World leaders were making speeches about unity and resistance. Capital cities were fortified and ready for siege. What the hegemony did not see was the farmer in Korea, who was teaching his alien neighbors how to operate camouflage defense systems. They missed the fishing village in Norway where human and alien families worked together to maintain orbital sensor networks. They overlooked the mountain community in Nepal where refugee engineers and human mechanics had built weapons that could shoot down warships. The first hegemony ship to attempt landing tried to touch down near Seoul, expecting to intimidate the government into surrender. Instead, it found itself under attack from energy weapons hidden in rice fields, operated by farmers who had learned that protecting your neighbors was more important than protecting yourself. The invasion force had studied human military capabilities extensively. They had detailed intelligence on every weapon system, every government installation, every potential point of resistance, but they had no intelligence on the kindness of strangers, the stubbornness of rural communities, or the determination of people who choose to help refugees simply because it is the right thing to do. As the real battle began, it became clear that the hegemony was facing something entirely new in their thousands of years of conquest. They were not fighting an army or a government. They were fighting the human spirit itself, armed with alien technology and protected by bonds forged between species in quiet acts of everyday kindness. The outcome would depend not on who had the better weapons, but on who understood what it truly meant to be human. The final battle for Earth did not happen in the skies above great cities or on the fields outside military bases. It happened in rice paddies and wheat fields, in fishing villages and mountain farms, wherever humans had chosen to help strangers who needed shelter. Deho crouched in his transformed rice field, watching the hegemony dropships descend through the morning mist. The alien warships were massive and terrifying, their dark hulls blocking out the sun, but he was not afraid. Around him, hidden among what looked like ordinary farm equipment, were weapons that could punch holes through starship armor. Beside him knelt Nara, her pale blue skin almost glowing with determination. In her hands she held a device that looked like a simple farming tool but could coordinate the defense of an entire province. Her children, Jiho, Subin, and Hinwoo, were stationed at communication posts throughout the valley, their young voices calmly directing human and alien defenders. "Remember," Nara said quietly into her communicator, "we are not trying to destroy them all. We are showing them that their way does not work here." The first hegemony troops to land expected easy conquest. Their intelligence reports had told them that humans were a primitive species with limited technology and tribal loyalties. They landed near major population centers, ready to demand surrender from local leaders. Instead, they found empty cities. The governments had evacuated all civilians to rural areas where the real defense network waited. When the hegemony commanders tried to establish control over the abandoned capitals, they discovered that all the infrastructure was controlled remotely from thousands of hidden locations. The power grids, water systems, communication networks, and transportation hubs were all operated by farming communities that the hegemony had dismissed as irrelevant. Every time they tried to seize control of critical systems, they found themselves fighting not armies, but cooperative networks of people who had learned to work together. In Dehos Valley, the first attack came at noon. 3 hegemony fighters screamed overhead, their weapons charging to destroy what their sensors identified as a primitive agricultural settlement. The energy beams lanced down toward the rice fields. They never reached their targets. Hidden defensive systems, disguised as irrigation equipment, generated energy shields that absorbed the attack harmlessly. Return fire erupted from what looked like grain storage silos, sending precisely aimed projectiles that disabled the enemy fighters without destroying them completely. The hegemony pilots, trained in thousands of previous conquests, tried to call for backup, but their communications were being jammed by a network of alien refugees working from camouflaged positions in chicken coops and vegetable gardens. "This is impossible," one of the crashed pilots said in his own language as human. Farmers and alien refugees surrounded his emergency pod. "We studied your species. You should be surrendering by now." Hyun Woo, looking like a human 12-year-old but speaking in the pilot's native tongue, stepped forward. "You studied our governments and our militaries. You did not study our farmers." The pilot stared at the glowing-eyed child. "You are a hybrid. This violates galactic law. Mixing species is forbidden by hegemony doctrine." "I am Korean," Hyun-woo replied simply, "and Kalian, and Earthborn. I am what happens when people choose to help each other instead of conquering each other." As the battle raged across the planet, the same scene played out in thousands of locations. Hegemony forces, expecting to face centralized military resistance, instead found themselves fighting an enemy they could not understand. Every farm, every village, every rural community had become a fortress defended by people who barely knew each other but fought together because it was right. The turning point came when the hegemony fleet commander made a critical mistake. Frustrated by the unexpected resistance, he decided to make an example of one farming community. He targeted Dehos Valley with enough firepower to level a mountain, but as the orbital bombardment began, something unprecedented happened. Other hegemony ships moved to intercept the attack. The fleet commander stared at his displays in shock as his own vessels turned their weapons against each other. "What is happening?" he demanded. His second in command, a veteran of 100 conquests, looked at the data with confusion. "Sir, approximately 30% of our crews are refusing orders. They say the bombardment violates their understanding of honorable warfare." The hegemony had never faced this problem before. Their multi-species crews had always fought together without question, united by the promise of shared victory and plunder. But Earth was different. The refugees who had escaped to Earth had been talking to their former comrades, still serving in the hegemony fleet. They had been sharing stories of human kindness, of farmers who helped strangers without expecting anything. In return, in the communication center hidden in Dehos' barn, Nara was coordinating more than just Earth's defense. She was broadcasting to the hegemony fleet itself, showing them what life could be like when different species worked together as equals. Instead of conquerors and conquered, the images she transmitted were simple but powerful. Human and alien. Children playing together. Farmers of different species sharing knowledge to grow better crops. Communities that celebrated differences instead of fearing them. Jiho, using his 4 arms to operate multiple communication systems simultaneously, was translating messages from Earth refugees to their relatives still trapped in the hegemony. Military. Family members who had thought each other dead were reconnecting across the battle lines. Sabin's shifting skin patterns had become a complex communication system, allowing her to coordinate with alien species whose languages changed, meaning based on color and movement. She was helping hegemony soldiers understand that surrender did not mean death or slavery, but the chance to join something better. The hegemony fleet began to dissolve from within. Ship after ship broke formation as crews made the choice to defect, rather than continue fighting. Some landed peacefully in remote areas where refugee communities welcomed them with food and shelter. Others simply powered down their weapons and waited to see what would happen next. The fleet commander, faced with mutiny on an unprecedented scale, made one final desperate attempt. He loaded his personal ship with the most fanatical of his remaining followers and launched a suicide attack on Daeho's farm, determined to destroy the source of the rebellion. Daeho watched the ship descending like a falling star and felt oddly calm. He had lived a good life. He had helped people who needed help. If this was how it ended, he could accept that, but it was not how it ended. The hegemony ship suddenly stopped its descent, caught in a web of energy that had appeared around it. All across the valley, every human and alien defender had linked their personal shields together, creating a protective net that could stop even a suicide attack. As the enemy commander's ship was gently lowered to the ground, Daeho realized something profound. The refugees had not just brought technology to Earth. They had learned something from humans that was worth more than any weapon. They had learned that protecting others was more important than protecting yourself. The ship's hatch opened and the hegemony commander emerged, expecting to face execution or imprisonment. Instead, he found himself surrounded by farmers offering him food and medical attention. Nera approached him with a translator device and spoke in his language. "You are welcome here if you choose peace. Your crew will be fed and given shelter, while they decide what they want to do with their lives. Some will choose to return to space. Others may choose to stay and learn what we have built together." "Why?" the commander asked, genuinely confused. "I came here to destroy you." "Because," Daeho said through Hyenwoo's translation, "that is what humans do. We help people who need help, even people who were trying to hurt us." 6 months later, Daeho's farm had indeed become an interstellar embassy, but it still grew the best rice in the region. The former hegemony commander, who had taken the name Jong-soo to fit into his new Korean community, was learning to operate farming equipment with the patience of someone discovering simple pleasures for the first time. The barn now housed the headquarters of the Galactic Refugee Resettlement Alliance, but it also still stored hay and farm tools. The space-folding technology made room for both purposes without conflict. Nara served as Earth's first official alien ambassador, traveling between worlds to help other species learn the lessons that Earth had taught about cooperation and kindness. Her children had founded schools on a dozen planets where young beings learned that differences were something to celebrate, not fear, but the most important change was smaller and more personal. In farming communities across the galaxy, former enemies worked side by side, learning that the best diplomacy happened not in grand conference halls, but in quiet moments when strangers help strangers. Plant seeds for next year's harvest. Daeho, still a farmer at heart, often stood in his fields at sunset and watched human and alien children playing together among the grain stalks. His grandmother had been right all those years ago. Kindness was the most important thing in the universe. It just took a galactic war to prove it. The old Korean saying his grandmother had taught him echoed in his mind as he watched the peaceful scene. A single act of kindness throws out roots in all directions, and the roots spring up and